welcome to my podcast. My name is Brett Levins. Today, I'm going to bring you my former coworker. Some of you may know I'm no longer working at Cisco Systems, and I'm actually starting to move towards a potential career pivot into recovery-friendly workplaces, which, I've been doing at Cisco for the last 3 years before me and 5,000 of my other fellow employees were asked to leave. And it was tough to leave the recovery-friendly workplace stuff behind. That's a body of work that I'm just thrilled is continuing in a robust fashion. I'm still in contact with people that are continuing that work forward, and it's all about the people that it helps. So it's awesome. Anyway, this is Karen Duggan, and she is the first person that I knew at Cisco that was also sober. And that was an important moment for me to know that I wasn't the only person in sobriety at this large company. It was a big deal. And it, it wasn't like we talked all the time about it or anything, but once I knew that, just knowing that there was another person that was sober and watching out for themselves, and it was a big deal. So I don't know how else to say it. She and I have been friends for a long time. We did some work together with team building. She mentored me for some team building stuff inside Cisco, and I'm just a big fan of Karen. So let's get this conversation rolling. All right, what a treat, Karen. So you know this, but my audience doesn't know this. So, my experience as being a sober person at a large corporation, that's where you and I met and worked together. And I was not ready to tell anybody. It was a secretive, shameful thing that I carried and was protective of as I went along. My sobriety was solid, but being out there with it. And I don't remember specifically when it was, but I remember the conversation that you let it drop that you were sober. So I'm going to tee you up like that. I'd love for you to introduce yourself to my listening audience, who you are, and how we kind of know each other, whatever feels right. But then I'd love to get to that conversation, and I want to drill into that as we go, if that sounds cool to you.
That sounds great. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Brett. Thanks for having me. We've been talking about doing this for quite some time, so I'm really happy we finally made it happen. I'm Karen. I am an alcoholic. I have been for many, many years, and I've been in recovery for quite a number of years too. So this September, which is about 4 months away, I will be celebrating 29 years of sobriety. So I over time have learned to be pretty open about my recovery. I don't share it. I don't wear it like on my sleeve. Like it's not the first thing you'll learn about me, but I also don't hide it at all. So I was super happy. I think the way that conversation went, if I remember correctly, is you used some kind of a phrase that I recognized as 12-step. And I was like, oh, hey, yeah, me too. And I'll be curious to see if that's your memory about it as well. But I know you're going to ask me some questions about workplace, but I'll just say that when I first got sober, well, maybe not the first time, but when I got sober and stopped drinking, I was in a workplace where they knew me intimately. It was a smaller workplace. It was a restaurant company, and I used to drink a lot with my colleagues, with my bosses, with people that were supposed to look up to me. And so when I got sober, it was quite noticeable. And I feel very fortunate that my boss at that time, a restaurateur, understood the need. And I got to go to meetings at lunchtime every day and, take that little extra time that it took to get to the meeting and get back to the office. And that went on for about a year and a half, where I was doing 3 lunchtime meetings a day with that extra time, until he finally said, some people are feeling a little bit like there's some inequity in how you're able to do that every day. So can you figure out a different meeting schedule? But that was amazing that, for in my first couple of years to have that support and in sobriety in the workplace was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a great start. So I'd love to just mention to my audience and see if I paint this picture accurately to you. So the reason that Karen and I know each other as well, besides working in the same company, and in that conversation where I probably said something and you're like, hang on a second, I heard a little hunk
Yeah.
of language there that I zeroed in on. So Karen you've been a team coach for a long time,
Mhm.
and you're one of the best, what do you call it, container builder that I've ever had the opportunity to observe. And I think that it's safe to say that people that do that well have a high empathy quotient, if you will, able to feel and read the room well and make space and try to make safety occur. And so I had the privilege of, watching you work and learning from you when I was mentoring with you for that power of teams at Cisco. So with that predisposition, assuming that you brought it with you as a before and after you got sober, how do you think that it is, because you're sober in that line of work? Do you look at that? First off, if I painted that picture the way you would find it accurate, if that's true, or fine tune it, but how do you feel about that type of sensitivity and being sober, or how it would influence your work, if you will?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so spot on that it's like a direct result of coming into that work in recovery. So that line of work appeared for me about 12, 13 years ago when I was doing a thing. I was, pretty far in, halfway into my sobriety so far, right? At least I was selling a behavioral assessment and going into organizations and doing trainings around that. So helping people gain self-awareness, awareness of other, and then how that interaction might affect their working together and how they could work better together. So first of all, just the fact that I was like super interested in understanding more about myself, right, on a deeper level. Who am I? How do I operate in the world? Absolutely came from the training I have through the steps, right? Doing inventory, getting to know myself, getting to, to self-acceptance, right? And understanding more. And so, and I understood that to be like a really powerful way to be in the world. And if I could bring it into a workplace, I was like, wow, that's amazing. And so from there, someone said to me, oh, you should look into OD. And I'm like, what's OD? And organization development. And so then I go look at organization development and I go, whoa, just mind blowing when I looked at it's all about human potential and connecting that to, organizational results, which I always find really fascinating. And how do you get there and how do you sustain it and all of that? So, but when I looked at it and I started to go deeper into, how do they get there? It was like everything clicked and I thought, oh, all this work I've done, all this digging in and inventory and personal development and, it starts to make sense now. Right. And this is the work I want to do. And so because I was not young and not early in my career, I was like, oh, I need to go fast track my way to do this work for the rest of my career. And so I went to get a master's degree in organization development. And I'll just tell you, Brett, like coming into that as a sober person was pretty remarkable too, because there's a foundational piece of it where they say self is instrument. And so you have to be a clear channel. And 100%, if I had tried that as, when I was still in my cups, as they say, there's no way, there was no clarity there. There was no clear channel there. It was all noise. It was all noise. And so, what you witnessed of me being a container, I learned in the rooms of AA, right? I learned in 12-step rooms, like how to sit and just listen and actively listen and not interject and not try to control the conversation and where are we going, but just really like you said, just create space, hold space. And I say that in AA meetings. I still go to meetings and I do a couple of 12-step programs. AA is, kind of primary. I'll tell people, I'm like, I get to sit in a room with people and basically do what we do here, but like, out in the wild,
Yeah.
not recovery related, but let people be themselves and let them, express vulnerability and help them feel okay about it. And it has remarkable results in the workplace, right? When people understand each other as human and fallible and vulnerable, and it's all okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Your answer to that doesn't surprise me. And it also makes me think that that's accurate. Meaning what I mean by that is I think people in recovery can be and often are, for lack of a better way of saying it, tuned up.
Mm.
I think it's in some ways a result of what you just described, at least in my case, in your case. We spent years actively listening, like practicing listening. And that in and of itself is a not as common trait in the world. It seems there's a lot of talkers and not a lot of listeners. And when I've seen you do your work, it's clear that you're comfortable listening. And I've often thought, once I knew you were sober, I was like, well, this is also a function of Karen being a sober person, of which I am too. And then there's that whole connection of sober people have with each other that was meaningful to me as well. So anything you want to add to any of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because as you say it, the other thing that I will bring into rooms when I sit with teams is one of my superpowers is I can manage awkward silence with the best of them, right? So a lot of people can't handle that. And again, I attribute that to like sitting in a meeting and no one saying anything. I'm like, okay, someone will pop when they're ready. Right. And like just knowing that. And so I think that's kind of funny. And I'll call it out. Like it'll be quiet and you start to feel that energy rise where people are getting uncomfortable. And I'll just say, hey, it's, awkward silence is one of my superpowers. I can wait, and people will laugh and then someone will go, all right, I'll go.
And I've heard you do that.
Yeah.
I've stolen that from Karen. Even saying it out loud, I that awkward silence is my superpower. First off, there's a humorous thing that engenders with everybody, an instant blast of safety, and we're okay.
Yeah.
And it also empowers me to, I just said that now just cool off and
Yep.
what happens. So
yeah.
Wonderful. Well, in the workplace, you have literally, and I'd be guessing, I know you've been doing full-time team building and coaching at the company we worked for.
Yes. In the past tense now. Yeah.
Through that lens, you've seen and heard a lot of things. You've seen lots of tears. You've probably seen some pretty good fights. And I guess you can play around with any of that, but the one that I'm the most curious about is because I'm very interested and active in this idea of recovery friendly workplaces. Earlier you said you don't wear it on your sleeve, but you're not quiet about it. I'm just curious how often people would approach you at Cisco and ask you and want to get curious potentially about themselves or family members. Did that happen much for you in your?
That's a really interesting question. Like I said, like I don't wear it on my sleeve. If people ask, I'm very comfortable talking about it. What I would have happen sometimes is that so for people that don't know what this team building thing is about, is that one of the segments that we do, if we're doing like kind of an extended session with people, is we have a trust session where we ask people to share about who they are as human beings. So like what's going on for them? How are they doing inside and outside of work? And so a lot of people end up sharing, really personal stories. And because it is often feels like a very safe container, like things will come out about things that are troubling them in their personal lives. And so I will say it does definitely happen that people will talk about, more often than not, it's more about a family member than about themselves. That they'll talk about someone whose use, substance use has been problematic and that they're dealing with it in some way. So they're either the person is is maybe in a recovery situation, or like, it has gone into treatment center, or they've come out of it and they're doing better, right? So they might be talking about, we're kind of on the other side of it. So they will talk about it in the group setting. And I will not typically bring myself into that story in the moment in the team because it's not about me, but I will reach out to them afterwards on a one-to-one and say, hey, this is part of who I am. If you ever need to or would like to talk or anything, I'm available to you. So that has happened periodically over the years. I did have people talk about, I was drinking too much. I needed to I'm now not drinking. So they would talk about that. And that happened probably more in and around COVID than at other times where people were talking about, because one of the questions we would ask is like, what's it like for you at work, at home, and, internally for yourself. And so, sometimes that would come out. So again, because I don't usually insert myself and my personal story into that sharing, I would generally reach out to someone afterwards and be like, hey, I gotcha. I know, I understand what you were sharing about. But it wasn't really until, Brett, the work that you did to create that safe space of, that community, that's where I started to see that being broadcast a little more with that focus. Although, were you in the safe space? Yeah. Sometimes I would see that in there too. Again, generally more about people that had family members and that they were having, challenges because of a family member and it was affecting their own mental health, right? I would see people share about that more so than like, oh my gosh, I've been blacking out and I need to stop.
Well, let's spin it up then a little bit. So for your trainings, I believe it's true that you did quite a few of those in person.
Yes. Yeah.
And I don't know if you ever.
Yeah. Before pandemic, it was a lot in person, mostly in person.
And were those all in San Jose, or did you travel as well?
Oh, it was global, like all over the world. Yeah. And that's kind of interesting because like when you're in person, you do tend to go out to dinners and things like that. And in the United States, much easier to decline a drink and not have to go into any story about it than in other countries. In other countries, it's a little bit tricky, sometimes, because sometimes it can feel like you're being disrespectful if you don't accept what's being offered to you. I just had to, I learned this in early sobriety to just say, I have an allergy to alcohol, which is 100% true. Right. But most people won't press you if you say you have an allergy, because they're going to ask you to like make yourself sick.
You nailed it. Like, that's where I wanted to lead you toward. And in some situations, or how often did it occur that people would pressure you, that would press you in spite of how you would reply? What was your experience around that?
I honestly can't think of anyone that ever pressured me after I said I had an allergy to alcohol. Before it, if I hadn't used that phrase, if I had just said, no, thanks, I'm good, that type of thing, they might be, oh, this wine is delicious. Like, you shouldn't miss it. Really, you don't know what you're missing. Oh, you don't know what you're missing. Like, if I drink that, woo. We are all grateful that I'm not drinking right now, right? Like, but I typically wouldn't say things like that. I might with colleagues, that were like, if we were at a training and it was all people that I work with, not that I'm, in service of, right? There's a difference there if it's a client versus a colleague. But I really can't think of a time where I invoked the allergy that someone pressed after that. I would have people get curious. How did you learn that? How long ago so did you used to drink? How did that what was that like? So when people show up that curious, I tend to then start to give a little more detail.
Yeah.
What having an allergy with alcohol ends up looking like is I black out. I don't remember what has happened, and it's dangerous. So if they continue asking, I'll say more, right? But sometimes I would ask like, oh, is there a reason you're curious? And again, it mostly tended to be people were more willing to talk about other people than themselves. Oh, my kid drinks a lot. I'm worried about them. But people do find it fascinating when they learn you don't drink. Fascinating, you know?
Yeah, they certainly can. How about, so just again in the work setting, whether it's with a, group that you've just spent some time with doing, classes and team building, or whether it's with your peers.
Yeah.
How are you with being around people that are drinking heavily?
I am okay with it to a point. So I generally, because I got sober while working in the restaurant industry, it was baked in, right, to my surrounding. Like I stayed at that job for my first 3 years at least, maybe 4 years of sobriety. I was continued to work in the restaurant industry. And so it was just right there. Now, I was dating a chef at the time when I first got sober, and that did not last long at all. Like that was really hard. I wasn't able at that time to stay in relationship with a heavy drinker, but I was able to be around drinking. And so I think because of that, from that early stage of sobriety, I've always been able to be around drinking without much challenge. But I have a limit. Like when it starts to feel sloppy or loud, or that repetitive thing that happens where people start telling you the same thing, over and over, I just excuse myself. Like I don't stick around when it starts to feel uncomfortable. And if I feel like people are going to, you know, give me a hard time for wanting to do that, I might, what do they call that? The Irish goodbye or something, where you just like slip away.
Yeah.
You don't really, see you in the morning. I'll tell a person or two so they don't worry about me, but then just get out of there. And I never, no one ever like chased me down.
Yeah. Well, so I'll just add to that. You use the word uncomfortable, and, at least for me, it's not a longing or a jealousy. It certainly isn't. It's just, for me, it's similar. I don't really have the right words to describe it. When I'm up close and can't escape heavy drinking, when people are getting really slop. It's been a little while. It's been a few years since I've tested it.
Yeah.
But the last time it happened, I realized, well, this isn't for me. And, I'll tell on myself for a second here. I am that person that would have probably encouraged people, the wine is so tasty or whatever it is. I've sat in that spot. And so I wish I could go back and redo some of that. But I think it's actually kind of part of why I think I can be more helpful in some ways, because I've been that person.
Yeah.
Right. And, at least in my case, it was bad. It was already terrible. And that was just me wanting people to be with me in that effort of getting way too sloshed. I think it's true, and I'd love your thoughts on this. I think it's true that people, including Brett as a younger age, encouraging people to drink or whatever, being confronted with, I have an allergy, would have been an interesting one earlier on to me. I don't think I ever encountered that one, but people would say no for whatever reason, and I could potentially press them. But I also think it's true that I'm not a bad person. And I really think in some ways I thought that I was doing them a favor by, helping them get to the good stuff.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of people that are unaware of what's going on, because it is such a shame and stigma thing. And I think particularly in the workplace, people like you and me, your colleagues knew, so they knew not to press you or whatever. But I really think that those people that are doing that kind of stuff, if they knew more, they would be less likely to do it. In fact, they would probably be the first to say, all the heavy drinkers were going that way, and not be pushy and not make a scene. Do you think that's true? Or do you think that do you think that more knowledge is going to help people to not do those kinds of behaviors that put people like us in a very dangerous situation? Do you think that's true, or any truth in it?
I think there's truth in it, and I think it depends.
Yeah.
If I think about myself when I was in my, heyday, I just wanted everyone, I didn't want to be alone in my drinking. I didn't want to feel like, I thought everyone was drinking as I was. I was shocked when I stopped drinking and I realized, like, wait a minute, like, not everyone around this table is getting drunk off their ass. Like, I thought we were all in it together. And so that's how I thought about it. But trust me, like, if I was high and, on the alcohol generally, like, that was my my drug of choice is really the alcohol, although, I would mix other things, but generally I would just be drinking. Even if you said to me no, I would have still been like, come on, like 100%. So education for me at that time probably wouldn't have helped because I'm in disconnect. I'm going to black out. I'm not going to remember what I said anyway. So I'm probably like the neural pathways aren't like all lining up in those moments. Right. So I don't know that it would have done a lot for me as a alcoholic drinker to know. Now, for other people who are not alcoholic drinkers, 100%, I think the education would help, where the leader who's just trying to, provide a nice time for people, right? Oh no, we've created this special experience. And part of it is the wine pairing with the expensive dinner or whatever, the education for them would be helpful. But for the alcoholic who's just trying to find a drinking buddy, probably not.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if I go back in time. I guess maybe a better way to advocate this concept too, or certainly you're right, like in my heyday or whatever. But part of the problem that I see growing up, I grew up in basically the 80s, just say no and all that stuff was going on. And there was a moral equivalent involved. There was, you were being sneaky and you were being rebellious, and there was some truth to that, right, as well, which I kind of loved in a lot of ways. But I was so resistant to know anything about it. When even in high school, when there would be a few people that would go to rehab, we laughed about it, and we'd say things like, "They don't even drink that much. What the heck is going on?" And so I was so resistant to learning anything about it. But I don't think I'm a bad person, and I think I think I'm naturally empathetic and a caring person. And I got this belief thing going, Karen, that the more our society learns about substances and substance use disorder and this stuff, at least I'd like to think that maybe if I knew a bit more, I might have been a little bit more sensitive to those kinds of situations. And that's really what I'm hoping for, is our society to have a continuing giant wake up about normalizing, the science of it. So yeah.
I do think there's truth there, Brett.
Yeah.
100%. I think that I think that the stigma in many, many places has been reduced.
Yes.
I don't think it's gone, but I think there's a lot way higher degree of awareness and consciousness than, again, like I was a teenager in the 80s, right? Coming up, like I happened to get a job at a very fancy rehab center in Connecticut. And so I was doing filing. And so I was able to read people's files and some famous people's files. Like it was super interesting, but they were all, it was alcohol and drug addiction and mental health is what people were getting there for. I just, I got introduced to the concept of recovery there. One of my friends was also working there, was actually a good friend with one of the psychiatrists, and she would tell him about our escapades, and he was like, I think the two of you might want to check out meetings, So her father was alcoholic, and so he sent us off to Alateen. And, wouldn't you know it, we had a 6-pack in the car. We were drinking on the way. But I was introduced to 12 steps as a teenager through that, which was really interesting. Yeah. Like super interesting to have that. But that was a special circumstance, right? I think today, kids know. Like they know in a different way. I have a 19-year-old daughter. They know in a different way. Now she knows very intimately because of me, but they have access to so much information. And I think they just have a different understanding of what's possible. If you make choices like that, these are things that could happen, and these are, outcomes that might be a part of it. And a lot of them still make those choices to do it. Okay, fine. But they have more information than we did.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah. And that's really encouraging to me. And the stats prove that out, that the younger generations, they don't drink as much, they're less interested in that stuff. And so, the problem in corporate America is very often it's, middle-aged folks that are running the boat, and they're not aware of these things.
Yep.
And, like when I was doing my work at Cisco, and I was, delving in there and learning things as well, I was also interested in policies, because in theory, policies is where it all stems from, right? And I'd heard, and I think you read some of those deals where people would, get sent bottles of wine or bottles of booze, job well done kind of thing.
Yep.
And at least in a couple of cases, and I've heard several when people would talk to me about it, for them, it was early in sobriety too, where it's, you're still in the red zone, right?
Yeah.
Like I can't imagine having a drink right now, although I go to places where I get to hear stories of what happens when people like me test it out. And I'm convinced that it's not a good idea. So but that's beside the point. I guess what I'm saying is early on, to have a drink for me, I believe is a absolute insane roll of the dice for potentially years.
Yes.
And if a manager with all the goodness in their heart is sending this bottle of wine to an employee without that kind of knowledge of how serious it is for people like us.
Yeah.
I don't think it's malicious. I just think it's like just an obvious one to ask in advance, or maybe not even ask, and just don't do it. Right.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on any of that?
I think it's really interesting. I mean, I have lived experience of, having time away from drinking. When I was about 25, I took a 1-year sabbatical from drinking, and, tried a few meetings early on, but I was like, oh, that's not for me. I was way too enlightened in the moment, Brett, don't you know, at that time of my life. I was like, oh, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. That's not very enlightened, that doesn't leave room for the miracle. Like I was just, whatever. You didn't want to talk to me at that time of my life. But, a year went by. I felt better. I was like, oh, maybe I won't drink anymore, until I landed on the beach in Mexico, for vacation. And I was like, what would make this sunset just a little bit more special? Margarita, because I know a lot about myself now, and I'm not going to drink in the same way. And of course, I hadn't read the big book, right? Like, so I didn't know that this was like so typical. And that 15 months of dry was followed by 5 years of hell. 5 years of hell. And led me to suicidal ideation and therapy. And the therapist was like, hey, why don't you try AA? And I said, I've been there. I don't know, blah, blah, blah. Not for me. And she said, well, your insurance will look kindly on it if they think you're trying to help yourself. So I might be able to get you some more free sessions with me. And I go, oh, all right. I'll do that. And I haven't had a drink since that AA meeting. Now, 18 months later, I did have a little toke off a marijuana cigarette, and I was at a music festival, and I had enough of a fear just come over me in that moment. I took a hit off that joint and I thought, oh, I just lost my sobriety. And I felt like almost like a curtain come down, and it felt like disconnect from whatever, conscious contact I had built up at that point. And it scared the living hell out of me. And so what I did was I literally grabbed a chair. I sat it up in front of a band that was playing, and I sat on my hands because I knew, I'm like, if I pick up a drink right now, I'm done for. Like, I can't do another of those 5 years out. So the point is this. I have had lived experience that one drink leads to, for me, my experience, I can't do that. And so again, because I was around alcohol so much as a newly sober person, I've had people give me the bottle of wine and I just go, thank you. And I hand it off. But for someone who doesn't have that wherewithal, or maybe they're by themselves and they're in a bad period, like, I do think that I think it would be smart to have policy that says no alcohol. It's not necessary, right? Give a gift card and they could go buy alcohol if they want, right? Like, I agree with you. I think that would be a reasonable way to support people from not getting put into a situation like that.
Yeah, I stole this from somebody else, but why not just make it a carton of cigarettes while you're at it?
Right.
If you replace it with a carton of cigarettes, suddenly it seems really absurd.
Yeah.
But
Little hit of fentanyl,
job well done. Here's some Marlboros, a lot of them.
I love it. Yeah.
What's funny, I've used this metaphor. I don't know how I came up with this metaphor, but it's true for me. I believe that my synapses and neurons, my brain wiring is slick and ready for a drop of booze to hit and I hope not a drop, because the odds of that are higher. But I have my wife taste things for me, and I'm very, very, very careful. I don't eat desserts that have booze in them. I'm probably ultra careful, probably too careful. But I have this little picture in my mind of these synapses, and I've got these. Do you guys have oil can Henrys down there?
No.
For oil change? Anyway, they have this shtick where they've got their nice white clothes with a bow tie and these little beanie hats. And
sure. I've seen that.
Real crisp looking fellas and women. And anyway, I've got this picture, and they come to work every day in that part of my brain, and they say good morning, and they got their lunch boxes, and they spend time getting those synapses and neurons just as smooth as they shiny and ready to rock every day, because all it's going to take for me is take a swig. And I think I'm a 5-year person, Karen. I don't think I've seen plenty of the, amazing folks that come back after a week or a night, but usually it's a few years, because that 8 minutes is blissful for me. So yeah, in the workplace, it makes it tricky because, I'll give you another example, a guacamole making contest that we had for our organization. And some people had spiked it with tequila and wine, right? And didn't say anything, right? And I happened to catch it, and so I knew which ones to steer clear of. But I just thought, those are good people right there that are just not aware of how dangerous that is for me to put into my mouth.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, you're also in a global workplace. You're also dealing with people's like religious beliefs too,
Yes.
right? Like there are people that don't drink alcohol very, conscientiously because of their belief system. And so, yeah, that to me, there should be no gray area there. Like you're no spiking food without clear signage, right? Yeah, but true. Like I agree. This was kind of a funny story at my back in early sobriety and the restaurant company. And so the founder had brought his, senior staff out for a nice dinner. And we were in LA at the time. I think we were sitting in Santa Monica. And it was a group of like 15 people. And as the night wore on, and everyone's drinking, I'm not drinking, I'm newly sober. As the night wore on, some people started to leave. And so the rest of us started to shift over in our places. And I was sitting next to my dear, dear, dear colleague who was a heavy drinker. And bless her soul, she is not with us any longer. But she, she's next to me, I'm next to her, and there's a seat next to her that opens up. She moves down, I move down. And the Scotch and water glass was the same as the water glass. And so when we moved down, we didn't shift glasses. I just picked up the glass in front of me and took a big old swig thinking it's water. And I went so loud that everyone that was left at the table heard my audible sigh, like scared sigh. And they all look at me and I'm just holding Katie's glass. That was her name. And she's like, "Oh my God, that was my Scotch." And everyone is just watching me for about 30 seconds, like waiting to see if I'm going to like combust, right? Because they all knew I'm like not drinking. And so I had that moment where I was like, and it was already down. Like there was no like spitting it out. I prayed a lot that night, because I had ingested, a big gulp. Thank God she actually watered her Scotch quite a bit, but I drank a lot of water. I prayed. I talked to my sponsor the next day, and it did not set me off on a course, but I feel like I was pretty lucky. Like, it could have gone the other way. It could have like, lit that little pilot. It could have easily, because I'm very susceptible. So anyway, I agree. I think it's dangerous, for people to mess with people's wellness in that way.
My drinking wasn't particularly public near the end. It was mostly alone, but then I got sober. And I navigated as best as I could, right? And for a while there, it was really uncomfortable. My life was pretty uncomfortable trying to figure out how to do life without booze and drugs. In spite of the fact that I was going to meetings, I was around recovery, I was around people. There's a big old word on the door that says anonymous right on it, right? And so at work, at least, I didn't tell anybody except for, I think, maybe one person who I got, and that took years to where I got there, right? And that's my story. But circling back to that conversation that I had with you, somebody that I thought highly of already, I'd already spent some time with you, and then to have you share that with me. And I don't remember the specifics of the conversation. I just remember, my God, I know somebody else at Cisco who's in recovery now, and it's Karen. And I think Karen's cool, and she's doing cool work and all that. And that made an impact on me, right? And so I can say from a first person perspective that it's been true for a long time that connection has been important for me as I find my way to staying sober. But in the workplace, it was absent until I met you. To know somebody else you're working with is in recovery, and I'm hopeful that becomes more commonplace. Over to you.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Like I said, like I'm not gonna meet someone for the first time and go, "Hi, Karen, I'm alcoholic." Although I did have fear of that for so long that I would do that by mistake, right? Because I went to so many meetings and I was so used to introducing myself, right, with that. But I'm super okay talking about it. And so like I'm pretty sure, again, don't remember what phrase you used. I'm pretty sure you dropped a phrase that sounded like. And I will often say things like, oh my gosh, are you friends with Bill and Bob? Right. And if people have no idea what I'm talking about, I just move on and I'm like, oh, I don't know what I was thinking. Right. Like I just pretend that I've just had a senior moment or whatever. But I'm super happy when I find people. And again, like if people ask me if we're out and there's a situation about drinking and no, thank you. I don't drink. Why? Like if they're pressing, the allergy thing, I'll say, if I feel like it's probably culturally people can't understand or have a harder time understanding, I'll use that more in those situations. But I'll often just say, I'm sober. And so, oh, do you ever drink? No, I don't drink at all. I did, I drank plenty, I drank enough for a lifetime. So I'm sober now. And so I will say it because I know that there is a chance that someone needs that hand, that opportunity to talk, that, if it's for themselves or for someone in their family. And I've been in Al-Anon for a long time too. And so if someone needs to talk about a family member, I'm there for that too. But I do think that it being more open and accepted in the workplace to share that. I think that about like everything though about humanity. I have anxiety, I have depression, I'm going through a divorce, I have, I lost a family member. Like I think all of those things, like when they talk about separation of work and home, how? How do you separate it? I'm sorry, when people are going through things, you can't not bring it to work. Work might be a haven, a place where you can actually get a little respite from having to think about whatever's happening all the time, but it's not like it's gone away. And so I think, humans being able to be human at work is essential. And having that opportunity to just be real and real about what's going on, you know, at the end of the day is going to create more productivity, loyalty, engagement, for organizations. I think it's, again, I said it earlier around this field that I tripped into that I didn't know about before. It's human potential plus organizational results. They are linked, right? And part of human potential is human realness, human vulnerability, right? Like when you can show up fully, when all of your strengths and all of your goodness, but you also have to have the opposite, right? Like the reality of what's going on in your world. So I think it's smart business, right? To let people show up and be fully who they are and speak openly about all the things. Not the things that you bring to therapy, right? We're not holding therapy at work, but I also feel like you shouldn't have to hide. You shouldn't have to hide if you're in therapy, right? Like you shouldn't have to hide if you're going through something and that's something that you're doing. And you shouldn't have to hide if you're in recovery, and you shouldn't have to hide if you're in a difficult time in your life.
And disease parity too. Like I would never encourage somebody to eat sugar or make sure there was all sugar on the table if they had diabetes. And similarly, I'm not going to have the only beverage be alcohol because
Right.
somebody's got this condition. They can't drink it or they shouldn't. So we'll conclude this with a little. I'll give you a chance to close it up too. But I don't know if you know this, and I want to do a little for those that are of my audience that are into recovery friendly workplaces, which is a growing group of people because I'm getting more and more into that. Today is that we're recording. This is May 21st, 2024. The White House released a toolkit, basically a recipe for how businesses can become an accredited recovery friendly workplace. It's called Recovery Ready is the word they use, in November of 2023. The accreditation document, I participated in proofreading it a little bit, and it releases next Tuesday, May 28th.
That's exciting.
That is an opportunity for anybody that's listening to this that's in HR or any kind of company there's going to be an accreditation, national accreditation document that you can strive for or potentially check boxes and become accredited very soon. So I really believe that we're in the middle of a tipping point, and I believe corporate America is likely going to change the world. So there's my public service announcement and my little commercial here at the end, and I'll put links in the show notes for some of that stuff as well. Karen, it's weird that we won't be working at the same company. I feel like we've known each other a while now, and that we're both in recovery. I just think our paths will cross over time, and I know that you're going to do great work wherever you go. I'd love for you to any closing thoughts here as we shut our laptops and call it a podcast.
Yeah, love it. Yeah, it is a little weird we won't be working together, but I know we'll stay in touch, right? I mean, our connection was pretty clear even before we knew the recovery connection. So I'm really happy about that. And we do tend to find each other. That's also been my experience. So that's really cool. I just have such gratitude that my life is so different because of recovery. And so I don't take it lightly that it's a gift I'm given, right? And that I have to protect it as well. And so I love this work that you're, jumping into and that you're getting so involved, because I think it's important that where we go, that we're able to, again, be real and, be open about, like, this is something I need to take care of for myself so that I can show up, as the best person I can be for my company, for my family, for my friends, for my community, for the world. So thank you for that work you're doing. I will take a look when you share this link with me. I'll look at the show notes and look at those links and see if I can have some advocacy inside the new organization I'm going to, right? And, see if we can get that going there, because I think every little bit helps, right? Every organization that takes it up, you get that little ball rolling, you get that momentum, and it becomes a thing that can, like you said, change the world. It's fantastic. And thank you. Thanks for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you. As was mentioned earlier in the podcast, I'm going to put the show notes, some of the links and stuff. The Recovery Friendly Workplace Institute has, in fact, released that certification document. So that's an easy one to go and have a look at. I'll also put the link to the Recovery Ready Toolkit from the federal government that was landed in November of 2023. I'll put my website. So I'm moving in a direction, and my website is www.brettlovins.com, and that's spelled with 2 T's for all the Bretts out there. 1 T or 2 is often the first question we have for each other when we meet, and for the 1 T Bretts, we both know that it's spelled correctly with 2. So there's that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I hope that you'll open your mind up and maybe look around you in the workplace. There's a lot of winning to be done, easy wins for recovery in the workplace, and just being, looking out for your fellow person. Go to a dinner. There's going to be vegetarian on the menu. There's going to be gluten-free. And guess what? There's a bunch of us that can't and shouldn't drink, and there should be some parity when it comes to beverages, etc. So that's just one example of an easy win. So best to all of you. Reach out through my website, or, just keep listening as feels appropriate and share as feels appropriate as well. All right, take care.